r/NoSleep. Posted by you/Lady of Hell. The Harvest. Every single year, in the last week of August, the families in my hometown pray that there's no rhododendron blossom on their doorstep. My town was otherwise completely normal. It was a small community, one where everybody knew each other and their grandma. There were a lot of woods and plain fields and the houses had beautiful gardens. A perfect place to live, one could say. Growing up here had been as amazing as a childhood could be. Everyone around here had kids, so I had plenty of people to play with. We had stayed outside until dawn, explored the nearby woods, rode on our bikes all around town, played hide and seek in the cornfields. As we grew older, we spent our time by the river. My group of friends had become smaller over the years, but that wasn't uncommon. Anyways, my childhood had been great. And yet, every year we feared to find a rhododendron on our doorstep. Harvest Week wasn't something the adults would tell a kid about. But kids are perceptive, way more than most adults give them credit for. They listen, they think, they make connections. And most importantly, they talk to each other. That's how I heard about Harvest Week when I was 14 years old. Early in the morning, before class started, we all sat in our classroom and a kid named Tommy stood in front of the blackboard, talking about what he had overheard the day before. They said a monster will come and take all the kids away in summer, he explained, frantically waving his hands around. It will mark the doors of the families with children and then comes back to collect them 5 days later. And the parents have no idea how to stop it. "You're full of shit," someone from the back row shouted. "I swear, guys, that's what they said." Tommy looked actually desperate. "We're doomed." "Okay? Doomed." In that moment, our teacher entered the room. An elderly woman, rather small and with curly gray hair. "What is going on here?" she asked, looking at the scared boy who stood in front of her class. "Tommy says, a monster will take all of us away in summer. His parents said that," one of the girls supplied. The teacher paled a little, stayed quiet for a moment and shook her head. "No one is going to take all of you," she said. "Now, please sit down." The wording struck me as strange, but I didn't think too much about it. At that time, I simply thought Tommy had made this story up to get attention. I wasn't one to believe in ghost stories, especially not something outlandish as this one. A few weeks later, right before summer vacation, the story came up again. Not by Tommy this time, but another girl from my class. Scared of the things Tommy had talked about, she had asked her older brother about it. He had told her about his childhood best friend, who had vanished without a trace. Overnight, the boy had disappeared, had left not a single clue and was never found. That was when I got scared too. One person making something up was not unusual, but I vaguely remembered the disappearance of the little boy, although I had been very young back then. But it had happened in summer, that much I knew. I went home to my parents and told them about what I had heard, but they were quick to reassure me nothing about it was true. They told me there was not such thing as monsters, my classmates had just made up a spooky story to scare us and I shouldn't worry about it. Of course I believed them. On the first day of the last week of August that year, I was out late with a neighbor kid. He was 2 years younger than me, but we got along really well and he lived just across the road, so we hung out a lot. The sun was just setting, the street lamps turned on the exact moment we reached his doorstep. A rhododendron blossom lay there. The family did not own a rhododendron. My friend picked it up and rang the doorbell. His mother opened and stared wide-eyed at the flower her son held in his hands. "Where did you get that?" she asked, pale as a ghost. He pointed at the floor. She ushered him in and threw the door shut without a goodbye, eyes sparkling with tears. I returned home, of course, and from that day on, I watched the house across the road every night. Asking my parents would have no use, so I simply stayed awake and watched, waiting for something to happen. I saw my friend during the day, but as I asked him, he didn't say anything. Only that his mother had been worried because we had come home a few minutes later than usual. I knew something was wrong, although I couldn't name it at that point. There was no school anyways, so I stayed awake during the night and slept during the day. Nothing happened for 4 nights, my friend behaved as always, and yet I couldn't shake the sense of dread the rhododendron and his mother's reaction had left in me. In night 5, it finally happened. The first sign of its presence was an icy wind, blowing through the street. Way too cold for midsummer. A breeze blew through my open window and raised goosebumps all over my body. Next, the lights began to flicker. Every single street light went on and off in absolute unison. The rhythm was slow at first, but quickly grew faster and faster until it made me almost dizzy. The wind was stronger now, and cold as winter snow. I leaned forward and gripped the window frame. A figure, cloaked in shadows, walked down the road. They were tall and lanky, that was all I could gather through the flickering light. I was frozen in place as the figure approached my friend's house and stretched their long arms out. The lights went out. All the lights. I was surrounded by absolute darkness. The wind was howling, there was a storm going on outside. I wrapped my arms around my body to protect myself from the piercing cold. For several seconds, maybe even minutes, there was nothing but darkness and the screaming storm. And then, without a warning, there was a flash of lightning. No rain, no thunder, just a bright white flash and the lights came back again. The shadow figure was gone. I exhaled before I even realized I had held my breath and collapsed onto my bed. The next day, the garden across the road was overgrown with plumeria. The husband, who was a soldier, returned from whatever Middle Eastern country he had been stationed in, entirely unscathed. I never saw my friend again. Nobody ever searched for him. It took me almost a week to gather the courage to go to my parents and confront them with everything I had seen. But when I did, they sat me down at the kitchen table and explained it all. Every year, in the last week of August, a rhododendron blossom is left on the doorstep of a family. 5 nights after that, the thing in the shadows comes and takes the family's child away. The child is never seen again. But the family is granted a wish and the town thrives for 1 more year. A bargain that can't be refused. But there must be a way to stop this, I pleaded, almost petrified with fear. They then told me about the family who had tried to defy the thing. A young family had found the rhododendron on their porch and they did the unspeakable to their infant daughter to save her from the fate that awaited her. 5 days passed without anything happening, until there was another plant on their doorstep. A cypress branch. They died that night, suffocated by cypress that had grown in their lungs. The whole house was still overgrown with said cypress today. Nobody had ever tried to deny the monster its wish ever again. It took me a very long time to get over the disappearance, and almost certainly the subsequent death, of my childhood friend. Or maybe I never got over it, not really, but at some point, I stopped crying myself to sleep. His death was never properly acknowledged by the adults, so I took it upon myself to make a little memorial for him. Nothing too special. I tied 2 small planks together, crudely carved his name in with a kitchen knife and placed it near a pond in the woods, where we had liked to spend our time. And I placed flowers there. Every single week. The truth my parents had told me terrified me, of course. I appreciated their absolute honesty, but it caused a countless number of sleepless nights. I was afraid something would come for me in the night, take me away to some sort of hell or just kill me right then and there. Maybe devour me whole without leaving a drop of blood behind. Nothing like that ever happened, of course. The monster never appeared outside of Harvest Week. Now that I knew about Harvest Week, I was painfully aware of the sense of dread that settled all around town at the end of August. How nervous the people got, how on edge everyone was. I wasn't an exception to that anymore. Nightmares about rhododendron and storms and shadows plagued my nights all throughout summer and I felt actually sick when I returned home on the first day of the last week of August, almost expecting to find a blossom on the porch. I never did, of course. Not for 4 more years. The monster only takes children. I was 18 now, therefore not longer considered a child. My sister, Veronica, was not. She was younger than me, 5 whole years. I will never understand why my parents chose to have another child after such a long time, considering what was going on in our town. They were playing with literal lives here and it made me sick. I loved my sister. Ronnie was the sweetest girl in the world and I loved her more than anything. A part of me hated my parents for bringing her into this world where we had to fear for her life every single year, but I never let her know that. I never told her about Harvest Week. She was a happy child, popular in school, smart and well behaved. Her life would be better if she never learned what I had at such a young age. I was an adult now, at least on paper, and I was trying to build a life for myself. My plan, of course, was to leave this town at the first opportunity. I had already talked things through with Henry, my boyfriend of almost 3 years. Leaving my sister, who was 13 years old now, was not an option for me, not with a monster roaming the streets of this town every year. I would take her with me when I left, but for that, I needed money. Henry had a job at the same bank my mother worked at and it was paid quite well, so that was I start. I was working in a local bakery, it was a simple job with a decent salary. I didn't have a chance to get a better job. My grades had never been great in the first place and after my friend's death, they dropped even more. After barely managing to graduate high school, I took whatever job I could get. I bought a car a few weeks ago. Nothing special, just a 15-year-old worn-down Honda, but I drove and it didn't fall apart and that was all I needed. Henry and I both lived with our parents and therefore didn't need to pay rent, so we could save almost all of our earnings for our little escape plane. According to our calculations, it would only take us one more year until we could get in my car, take Ronnie and away to make a life in a town without monsters. We could leave next summer, before August. Before Harvest Week. The last week of August arrived faster than I had anticipated, but the thought that it was the last harvest week I had to survive here was oddly comforting. The familiar dread settled in the summer heat. The entire town was holding its breath, waiting for the monster to pick its next victim. Now I didn't see the rhododendron, but I noticed my parents' strange behavior. It was the 5th harvest week I experienced while being actually aware of what was going on, and I knew by now how they usually behaved during that time. But this year was different. They were more on edge than ever. I heard them arguing faintly in their bedroom, and a few times, I saw the tears in their eyes. Dad made Ronnie's favorite food twice this week. They let her eat ice cream for breakfast. She was allowed to stay up way past her bedtime, until she fell asleep on the sofa. I realized it after 3 whole days, and I drove to my childhood friend's grave and cried and screamed for a very long time. I came home late at night, Ronnie already fast asleep in her room. Mom and Dad were in the living room, watching TV. "When were you going to tell me?" I straight up asked them, voice still trembling. "Honey." Mom stood up and tried to reach out for me. I took a step backwards. "Not at all, right? You would have just waited until she's gone. You wouldn't let me say goodbye to my fucking sister." "She doesn't need to know," Dad supplied. "It's easier." "Easier for whom?" I interrupted harshly. "You know what? That's not happening. That thing won't take her. You can't do anything about it." Mom was crying now. "Try me," I hissed and stormed towards my sister's bedroom. I wasn't going to let her be taken away. Not that I wasn't terrified of the thing in the shadows, but if it wanted Ronnie, it had to get past me first. I threw the door open and shook Ronnie awake. She blinked at me, obviously confused. "We have to go, dear," I told her. "Come on, get up." "But it's late. I'm tired." I know, but this is urgent." "Come on, Ronnie. You can sleep in the car." I held her hand as we climbed through the window to avoid our parents, who would definitely try to stop us. I knew what I was doing was dangerous. I hadn't forgotten the story they had told me 4 years ago. But I wasn't a killer. I wouldn't end a life, I was trying to preserve it, and there were still 2 nights left before the thing would come for my sister. I just knew that if we managed to leave the town, we would be safe. It wouldn't be able to hurt us past the town's borders. I put Ronnie in the car and started to drive. As soon as we had left the town, I would call Henry and tell him to get my things and meet us somewhere. There was no going back now. My sister was asking what was going on, where we were going, why we had to drive away that late, what our parents were going to do, but I didn't answer. I was fully focused on driving through the empty streets. It was past midnight. The town was silent. Ronnie started crying as we left the houses behind us and demanded to know what was going on. "I'll explain it," I reassured her, but my voice was trembling with fear. "I will explain everything when we're in the next town, okay? Just trust me right now." "What about Mom and Dad? Are they coming?" I shook my head. "They won't, sweetie. I'm sorry." "What?" She grabbed my arm. "Are you kidnapping me?" "I'm saving your fucking life, Veronica," I snapped. We had reached the road towards the town's border, a straight street through plain fields only illuminated by a few scattered street lamps. And the lights started to flicker. My heart stopped. "No," I muttered. The end of town was near, we had to make it there. I floored the gas, my old Honda was obviously not made for such high speed anymore and started to rattle, but I didn't slow down. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight it almost hurt as I tried to outrun the flickering lights. The wind grew stronger. "Slow down," Ronnie screamed. "You're going to crash." I didn't listen. The howling wind threw itself against the car as if it was trying to push us off the road. The flickers grew faster. "It won't get you," I said, more to myself than to my sister. "It won't get you, Ronnie." I turned the air conditioning off, but it still blew icy air into the car and I noticed frost creeping on the windows. The howling of the wind was almost deafening. I had trouble to keep the car on the road. Ronnie screamed. The lights flickered like a stroboscope. Without warning, the lights went off and the car came to a sudden halt, as if someone had smashed the brakes. I was thrown against the steering wheel and then back into my seat in the fraction of a second, completely blinded by the darkness. I reached over and grabbed Ronnie's hand, holding onto her tightly. The air around us was freezing. I heard nothing but the sound of the storm. It was too early, I thought. 2 nights too early. I also thought I was going to die right then and there. With a loud crash, the windows of the car shattered. I screamed as I was showered in tiny shards and tightened my grip around Ronnie's wrist. The following seconds of silence were the longest in my entire life. Suddenly, Ronnie started to scream. She cried in terror as something tried to pull her away, to get her arm from my grip, but I didn't let go. She struggled, she screamed my name, pleaded for me to help her and for the thing to let her go. The wind blowing through the broken windows was a deafening cacophony. Let her go. A voice, cold as the storm, whispered in my ear. I didn't. The frost was grasping me. I felt it in my fingertips first and in my entire hand next until it was completely numb. Ronnie was still screaming and maybe I was too. The car was shaking, the strength of the wind left me unable to move. I couldn't feel my hand anymore. I couldn't feel how Ronnie's arm slipped from my grasp. There was an ear-piercing scream, a sudden strike of lightning and then the lights came back on and I was alone in the middle of the road. The windows were still broken. My sister was gone. They had to amputate my hand at the hospital. The frostbite was too severe, it was beyond saving as I arrived. Nobody questioned how I got a frostbite in the middle of summer. Nobody questioned where my sister had gone. Yellow poppy bloomed all over my parents' garden. Mom got promoted in her already high-paying job. Dad received a letter that he had inherited a lot of money from a distant relative he hadn't even known about. My boss gave me an unexpected raise. I cried when I received the paycheck. I moved in with Henry almost immediately. Since I earned more money now, we could afford a small apartment together and I couldn't stand living with my parents anymore. Not after everything that had happened. And I couldn't continue to live in the same house my sister had lived. We still want to leave, but I don't think I still can. If I ever could have anyways. The thing is, after feeling sick for a few weeks now, I just came back from the doctor. Turns out I'm pregnant. I'm on birth control. Henry and I have always used condoms. I have tried to leave. Exited the doctor's office, got into my car and started driving. My car broke down in front of the town's border. I tried to go by foot, but no matter how hard I tried, I ended up walking in circles. Every time I ended up in front of the large sign welcoming me to town, the painted bluebells almost mocking me. I gave up eventually. Sometime after sunset, I returned home. There was a tansy, lying on my bed.